Moving on to the annual report of the Security Advisory Council.
Board members, we're going to start this. This is an administrative report. The rest are instructionals, but I want to make this introductory comment. You have 6 advisory committees. This is the time frame of which they come back to you with the work that they've done. It also is the time for you to think about any questions you have about the functions of the advisory committee. If you want to suggest any topics for them, as you those topics and memberships will come to you in August. So this is sort of the report out of your advisory committee. We'll start with the Security Advisory Committee. It's probably the most active one, with new things happening due to state law or changes in our culture and our consciousness with security. But sort of this is for you to look at, ask questions about, and also make suggestions. I have the chairperson or the staff assigned to every one of these committees here. So it's really up to you to absorb this report and make suggestions or ask questions. So with that introduction, I turn it over to you.
Can I just ask, this is not a comment, but do we need to be mindful of what we say out in open about the Security Advisory Council?
This is generic, this is information. Okay. If you go too far in talking about security strategies, we will stop you.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the public document.
This is the public document.
Thank you.
Mr. Bacon.
I guess I would like to ask some questions about and being mindful of what Ms. Rothschild just said, but under the section of increased police coverage and school resource officers. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of discussion out in public about the SRO program, and I think that there's a lot of confusion about what it will entail. What do those roles and responsibilities, who defines them, what are they going to look like? I think there's a lot of concern. And I think because of the safety, or what is the name of it, the Safe to Learn Act of 2018, that we're kind of doing this at breakneck speed, and in a lot of cases feel like we're putting the cart before the horse. So I just want to kind of have a little bit of a dialogue and ask some questions about how do we plan to do that to make sure that we methodically go through this and do it appropriately, so we don't run into any issues in the future.
Well, and let me just, before I turn it over to Mr. Williams, let me just say that a lot of those questions are just still questions because the Safe to Learn Act, as you said, was very aggressive. The Oversight Committee is still forming, not formed yet. We're still working with definition of roles, but we have to have some base documents before we make a lot of determination of what SROs will be assigned to. Also say that once we reduce that to writing, how is that going to be approved? One of the suggestions might be to bring it to the board, to have the board take a look at it and turn input. But as far as specific questions, sort of about the process, I'll turn it over to Mr. Williams, who is our supervisor of school safety.
So, good evening. So as far as the process goes, it's really a combined process. So the Maryland Center for School Safety is going to be required to give a lot of guidance on a lot of these topics, and that will be steered by their advisory board, which they are in the process. Some of these things, the work is well underway. There are still some questions hanging out there. As far as the implementation, there will be guidelines, and there are some guidelines already out there as far as how we should implement things, and the Security Advisory Council is in the report. You'll see that's one of the charges, is to really weigh in on how we implement our portion, what we have latitude on and what we don't, from the CCPS side of things. So there's a lot of input coming from a lot of different angles, and myself and Mr. O'Neill, Mr. Falls have attended a lot of meetings to slowly get our mind around this bill, because it is massive. So a lot of those questions, as Mr. Guthrie said, are still unanswered, but we're working through those.
And I think it's important to say to the community, because I agree with you, the community is also asking us for answers about them. I think it's also important to say that this is a state law, but it was deemed to be important by the Security Advisory Committee, the introduction of SROs, and both by the Sheriff's Department, the Carroll County Board of Education, me, the commissioners, And we did secure, on the benefit of the commissioners, appropriate funding with or without the law. I mean, the sheriff was advocating for SROs, even to extent of his own overtime, to put them in our schools. The sheriff and I met with the commissioners, and as a result of that, we did get this increased presence. On the heels of that came the law.
Right.
And I know there's a lot of anxiety about there. We have a lot of questions we don't know the answer to. I hope going forward to build that capacity to understand and understand the duties and the functions of SROs along with the community.
Correct. And on the line of SROs and adequate coverage, I mean, the law states that we are to provide a adequate coverage plan. The fiscal note said that that was to be done by SROs, but the law specifically says that adequate coverage. Now, in the fiscal note, also the research was that they needed 26 positions here in this county to provide that adequate coverage. So some of it might be how you view it. The sheriff is deemed, and the Security Advisory Council has also agreed that the best way to approach that, at least that initial coverage at the high school level, is with SROs. We think that's a very good model that has been exhibited across the country, and it seems to be a best practice. And either way you slice it, the sheriff, to provide adequate coverage, is going to have to bring more bodies on. So it's a matter of how he and our Security Advisory Council feel it's the best way to do it.
Ms. Rothschild?
Mr. Guthrie, you said that the Board of Ed supported this, and unless I'm incorrect and it happened when I wasn't here, the board hasn't ever publicly taken a position on putting SROs, and I would just like to say, I haven't been convinced that SROs are the way to deal with this problem. That, it's my opinion that bringing back crisis counselors and behavioral specialists. So I just want to be clear that the board has never come out publicly and taken a position. I'm not arguing with law enforcement, but I want to be clear that I think there's other ways to approach this issue. My biggest concern then, and I think this goes to what Donna was saying, all this stuff needs to be figured out, but there are already police presence in our schools now, correct? Sheriff DeWeese put additional officers in. That was fun. So this is happening now, and I think some of the parents' concerns are right. I understand that you're figuring this out as we go, but then I feel very uncomfortable having the increased police presence without them knowing what the role is and us understanding what the role is and who's dealing with the kids and how they're doing it. So this feels very uncomfortable to me, and it feels like we're doing before we figured things out, and I don't necessarily know that that's the right way to do things. The other question I have, Mr. Guthrie, I could be wrong. You said most other school systems in the state have SROs, so are we looking to them to see how they have implemented SROs and the parameters they have in place for?
Certainly, we
Okay.
were the only system that didn't have a recognized SRO program. So certainly there is the model out there. We've borrowed from other school systems, but what we don't know is the training is going to be different. We don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, we don't know what this new training is going to be. We don't know what the new model is, and I tell you, this is fluid because our procedures and protocols have changed dramatically of how we handle active shooters since Sandy Hook. It is a completely different model that we're doing. And let me just be clear, the recommendation to the Board of Education from the Security Advisory Committee was SROs were recommended. The board did not take any official action, but there certainly was a nodding acceptance of SROs. So I don't want to be confused with technicalities. I would agree with you, there was no active vote, but certainly there was.
And no discussion by the board as a whole.
Right. Ms. Herbert?
I am a member of the Security Advisory Council, and I can say there was a wonderful presentation that day by Mr. DeWeese, and then on things of what they're planning on doing, and it did do a lot of explanation. And then there was a gentleman there that talked about the law, and people have to understand, though, that law didn't get passed to the last day in a cram, and everyone is still scrambling and trying to figure out all the contents in that law and how we can meet those requirements that are in that law. But yes, and the board and the sheriff, they're all working together.
Commissioner Howard.
Yeah, I want to say on this topic, I think first and foremost, we had an obligation to act and act very quickly, and I think that's a big part of what happened. This is a very unusual kind of topic for either our board or your board to take up because of its very nature. And part of the challenge is that I think sometimes there's an expectation that the next incident that we experience is going to be a reflection of the last incidents that occurred, and the reality is that's not really the case necessarily. So I think everybody's got to be careful. I think there's a wrong expectation by the public that this is something that's going to be adjudicated on Facebook or in discussions that are outside the security professionals. And as someone responsible for millions of dollars that we voted to put behind this, we really very strongly took the position that we wanted to make sure we understood the parameters of what was going to be done, but we did not feel like we were qualified to be involved in the details of what were going to be done. People need to understand that to fully express all of what's being done in security means you violated one of the most important premises of security, so it's a false expectation to really put on the system. I have every degree of confidence that the school system and the sheriff's department and those involved understand that none of this is an intention to put an armed officer in the schools to deal with things like detention and school discipline and dress codes and those kinds of things. And, you know, anybody suggesting that is just feeding a hyperbole that makes it very hard to do the right thing in a very difficult situation. It would have been 100% irresponsible not to secure those schools as best we can, as quickly as we can. The state law is great, but, you know, like a lot of things, it came without the funding to do what needed to be done. I am pleased that the funding is in there for our best interpretation of what adequate coverage is, but that's going to take some understanding of what that actually means. And I think that, you know, people should be rest assured that even though the legislation was aimed at the high schools, that I think all of the discussions about are about security for schools in a much more general way, and that our intent is to secure, in whatever measure we can, all of our facilities. So I would just say that I appreciate the very quick action of Mr. Guthrie and the sheriff in bringing that over to our attention. And, you know, just I think people need to manage their expectations. If anybody thinks that we should lay this all out in such graphic detail, you know, I think that's a mistake. It's an unfair expectation, and I think it would jeopardize the safety of the students and the teachers and the school personnel. Ms. Rothschild, to your comments, I believe it's not a matter of should we do this or the other. I think we have to do this, and then we should be having every bit of conversation about crisis counselors and those kinds of things. You know, it's like the drug situation we have. It's like we're dealing with what's on the street right now, but we're also shifting more resources to how do we get to folks before they ever get in that situation. I think this comes down to the same kind of approach.
And if I could say, this isn't done haphazardly. There's MOUs that will be in place that are being developed. There's policies that will be in place. And we have looked at policies from across the board. We've worked with NASRO. The training is being developed, the Maryland model, which is more specific than the national standard, which is going to probably, it will encompass some things that probably some of you have some concerns about that maybe have been missed in the past when it comes to potentially some national SRO curriculums. So it's not being done in a vacuum as some people might think, but it is being done cautiously and thoroughly, and the right things will be in place by the beginning of the school year next year, as far as MOUs, policies, and so forth.
So actually, Ms. Rothschild, I also sit on the security advisory. I will say that this has been an ongoing discussion amongst all stakeholders in there. All questions have been addressed. Mr. Williams is doing an incredible job of trying to follow that as well as, you know, help with the citizen part of it, the outreach. He came to a CAC meeting, answered all the questions from the citizens, the members of the CAC, and is bringing that back to the security advisory. You know, so there are stakeholders, all these questions, and it's a process that the Sheriff's Department has been laying out for us. I do realize that eventually our board is going to have to make policy and things like that for what's coming down, and I'm sure that'll happen, you know, once we start getting everything into place. So, but Mr. Williams is doing an incredible job.
Oh, I have no doubt. I mean, that was not in any way
Oh, no.
criticism of you.
So, Ms. Savigny.
Oh, I just wanted to say I agree with, you know, Devin, your position of, you know, we had never really taken an official action in public, and I felt that we needed to have this discussion. And I want to say I agree, Mr. Howard, with your comments as well. And I want to say, you know, student safety has to be a top priority. Absolutely. Like, there's no question of that. And I am grateful to the commissioners for building the $1.8 million into the budget and providing that budget. What I just want to make sure is that the roles and responsibilities and the process are really appropriately followed, right? Because that $1.8 million, that's not part of the school system's budget, that's part of the sheriff's budget, right? So there's going to have to be a lot of discussion as to what are the roles and the responsibilities. And I think that's appropriate that it's part of the sheriff's budget, but they're not the school system's employees, but they will be in the schools, right? So there's going to have to be a lot of roles and responsibilities and the process going forward. One of the things that I was a little bit worried about when I looked at the Safe to Learn Act of 2018, it says that there's going to be mandating standard curriculum for SROs. And I'd like to better understand what that means, right? Is that sound educational policy, right? So SROs, what are the criteria and the qualifications for those positions? These aren't necessarily certificated teachers, right? So, but are they going to be delivering curriculum within the school system? So trying to understand how that all works together.
I think that you might be a little confused on that. That curriculum, I believe, is referring to the curriculum for the training of the SROs.
For the training, okay.
So there will be times, certainly, that a teacher might, no different than any other time, a teacher might ask an SRO to come in and maybe deliver some, you know, some opinion or, you know, procedural answers to how things, you know, happen procedurally, like maybe in a government class or something like that as a guest speaker. But the intent is not for the SROs to become educators or assume those roles. That curriculum is talking about the is talking about the training of the SROs. So it's they're working on it now. It's very detailed. I can tell you I saw the first initial drafts that just came out from the first meeting on that. They have solicited a ton of input from stakeholders within the school system. So they're looking at a lot of different venues. Even I have to be certified again, which I mean I could be by the end of this school year in a different way. Who knows? But that's just a joke. But no, even they have to develop some guidelines for even school security directors or security supervisors on what they're going to be required as far as certifications or training that I have to hold also.
Just to clarify that point on the law, that the certification and the curriculum you see referenced refers to curriculum that the Center for School Safety will develop, and SROs will be employees of sheriffs or other law enforcement agencies, not school systems, and they'll be certified by the arm of the state police, which I forget the technical name.
Maryland Center for the Maryland Center or Police Correction Training.
So the
Center.
state police certify SROs, I guess roughly similarly to how MSD certifies teachers, but they're not going to be our employees. This summer we'll have an MOU, or at least a draft, and we can work with Dr. Locker then on how to present that to you, but there'll be a formal MOU agreed to with the Sheriff's Office and the school system that would reflect how the program would work. The new law also requires by the school year, or doesn't really say by the school year, but it makes sense to do it by the school year, that on our website, on the school system's website, notification be posted to the public as to what are the duties and responsibilities of SROs. That'll come out of, I think, the MOU that we'll develop locally and the standards in the new state curriculum, which Dwayne mentioned is going to involve the National Association of School Resource Officers' already existing curriculum, but then be framed around Maryland-specific stuff. So there will be, mandatorily, there will be some things published for the sake of the public at the start of the next school year.
Thank you. Mr. Warren?
Yes, on behalf of the students, I'd like to thank the Security Advisory Council for their report and recommendations. Student safety is one of the biggest concerns of the student body, and we appreciate what the council is doing to address the issue.
Thank you. Ms. Herbert, then we need to move on.
Just one more thing. Devin brought up behavior specialists, crisis counselors, but Mr. Falls, you did say that we needed one more thing, more psychologists, correctly? That's correct. Okay. I just wanted everyone to know that's what you're shooting for now. Okay. Just want to make sure on all these other problems that...
I can support that.
Yes, and he made a comment, and I remember that he said, we need to put school psychologists up at the top of that. So I want to give that a plug.
Last what we need to move on.
No, I just had one more quick question for Mr. Williams. You had in the report that the CAC has requested that you attend future meetings to provide updates and receive more feedback. Is that an understanding? Like, are you intending to do that,
Absolutely.
to go to the CAC regularly?
We recognized in the last year that one of our weaknesses in the system is better communication with parents. And the challenge is just what Commissioner Howard said. What can we share and what can't we share without risking or compromising security? So the Security Advisory Council will take all that feedback that I bring back. We have some ideas on how we're going to approach the upcoming year based on some of that feedback, and we'll develop some guidelines on what we communicate and how we communicate that to the parents.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So moving on.